As horse owners, most of us don't pay enough attention to one of the most important aspects of our horse's health, that being hoof care. It's far too easy not to schedule routine hoof care, and some of us just don't know where to look to find a farrier that's a good fit for our horse. It's also easy to rely completely on our farrier if our horse won't behave while handling his feet. Why not make it a positive experience for you and your horse? These subjects and more are covered in this series on hoof care. Former president of the Southern Nevada Horseshoers Association, Shane Jacob, and seasoned professional farrier John Jacob answer the most frequently asked questions about hoof care. These simple, basic concepts, if applied, will positively affect your horse's health. Good owners and stewards of our equine friends realize and assume this important responsibility.
A while back I was riding around with a friend of mine, Lonnie Simmons, and he was helping me shoe horses. He got to a place in his life where he's helped me shoe horses for quite a while, 1, 2, maybe 3 years, I can't remember. And just about every place that we went to, we'd get back up and we'd get back in the cab of the truck, and I'd just be going off. I'd be talking about the behavior of the horse, the relationship with the customer, about this foot, that foot. Finally one day he said, "Shane, you ought to put that on a video." And I was quiet for a while, and I think that's what he was after. Is it tired of listening to me? He didn't have that many options in the cab of the truck besides get out at a stoplight, or get out while we were going. But thanks to Lonnie for what it's worth. My name's Shane Jacob, and this is my brother John Jacob, and we're in the horse business. We've been involved in several aspects of the horse industry for a long period of time, and one of those is hoof care. I've been shoeing horses professionally for 20 years, and John for, what, 17 years. And during that period of time, we've had the opportunity to work with some of the best veterinarians, trainers, other farriers, and overall horsemen in the industry in our time. And that, and the literally thousands of horses that we've worked on over those years, thousands and thousands, is where we're coming to you from. And we put together this series on hoof care, and we are going to answer the most frequently asked questions about hoof care. And hoof care is not important. It's not unimportant. It's vital. It matters. Just think about it. A horse eats, drinks, sleeps. Yes, sleeps on his feet. He carries us around. He needs to be on his feet. As a matter of fact, when he's not on his feet, his respiratory and his digestive is compromised. Horses need to be on their feet to be healthy, and they're going to spend 85 or 90% of their entire life on their feet. If you have a horse that can't be on his feet for an extended period of time, you might be at the end of the road, you know, or down at the vet clinic with a sling trying to hold him up to get him where he can be on his feet to be healthy. Hoof care is one of the two most important aspects of horse health, the other one being nutrition. You know, most of us have heard the phrase, no hoof, no horse, and it's thrown around a lot, and I believe that that's not an overused phrase. It's underthought about. I think it was Benjamin Franklin that said, "For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. For want of a horse, the rider was lost. For want of a rider, the battle was lost. And for want of the battle, the kingdom was lost." And you know, and you think about that, and what I think he was coming from was, I think he was trying to say that if you pay attention to detail, you'll win the war. And if you put that into terms and you apply that to hoof care, there's just a couple of very simple, basic concepts that if you take care of, you'll win the war with hoof care.
We've made this series based on facts, not theories. Although it's really hard to give absolutes when you're dealing with a live animal, we've made this series as simple and factual as possible. It doesn't matter if you were a first-time horse owner that watched Roy Rogers on the silver screen and you just went out and bought your first horse, or if you're a seasoned veteran to the horse industry. We have something in here that's going to be valuable for everybody. You know, sometimes we get stuck in a kind of a rut and we're just kind of maintaining and we're not moving forward on our journey with our horse ownership. And I believe this series is going to give you some things that'll help you get out of that rut and move forward.
We look forward to you joining us for our series where we go in depth about the most frequently asked questions about hoof care.
Remember, no hoof, no horse.
A few years ago I had a horseshoeing customer. He called me on the phone and he'd just bought a new horse, and I could tell he was excited about it. He wanted me to come take a look and tell him what I thought about his new horse and put a set of shoes on him and do a couple others for him, and so I did. I went up and he said, "Shane, well, here he is, what do you think?" And I said, "Jim, that looks like a pretty nice kind of horse." And I thought he was a pretty nice kind of horse, and he was easy to work on, so then I liked him even more.
All right.
And so I finished that horse and I went to work on another one that, for him. And he had called his neighbor. Now, he really looked up to his neighbor as an excellent horseman. As a matter of fact, this is the first horse that Jim had bought by himself without having somebody helping him or advise him. So
Right.
he'd called his neighbor, who he thought was a really good horseman, to come and see what he thought of his new horse. So while I was there, neighbor came over and Jim says, "Well, here he is, what do you think?" And neighbor walked in the pen, did like this, and looked at the horse up and down. He walked around, looked at him, might have grunted a little, made like that. He wasn't saying anything, you know.
Right.
And Jim, he just wasn't giving it up for Jim. So finally Jim just said, "Well, I guess I've got the ugliest horse, the meanest dog, and the most beautiful wife in all the state of Nevada." Neighbor still, he didn't say anything. After a minute, he walked out the gate and he shut the stall. He looked directly at Jim and he said, "My dog's meaner." And he walked off. He went home. The whole rest of that job, I didn't see, nobody said anything. He just paid me and that was it. My name's Shane Jacob and this is John Jacob. We're glad you're joining us here for this part of our series on hoof care. And as discussed, hoof care is vital to our horse's health as one of the two most important elements of our horse's health, the other being nutrition.
As horse owners, it's our responsibility to manage our horse's hoof care. And to do that, we need to understand a few basic concepts. The major basic concept that was kind of getting most of it up to understand is going to be managing the growth versus the wear in our horse's foot.
Today we're going to discuss two of the most frequently asked questions about hoof care. Number one is, does my horse need shoes? Do I need to shoe my horse? And the other is, how often does my horse need hoof care? Because those two questions go together. Let's start with the first question. Does my horse need shoes? In order to be able to answer that, we have to take a close look at the 4 reasons of why your horse would need shoes. Those are protection, correction, traction, and competition. Okay, so let's start with protection. The idea of protection's been around for a long time. As a matter of fact, they had evidence of hoof protection in 500 BC. They actually had evidence of steel, some type of metal, being nailed onto a horse's foot from 500 AD.
The shoes on the bottom of our horse's feet changed the world at that time because all that we had for transportation was horses and cloven foot animals such as oxen. So when we started nailing shoes on their feet, our horses could go further and last longer, and the wait time in between growing that foot back that they'd wear off with the extra load was shortened way up because we had a piece of steel. And when that piece of steel wore out, all we had to do was put another piece of steel on it.
You know, when we talk about protection, oftentimes what comes up is the feral horse, the wild horse, the Mustang. And people ask me, "Shane, why does my horse need hoof protection when that wild horse is out there in the rocks in the middle of this tough terrain and he seems to get by just fine?" The answer to that is the feral horse, in several studies with the BLM, the Wild Horse Association, has been proved that it moves 50 miles in a day. Not in a straight line. He wanders, mostly in search of food and water for sustenance, 50 miles in a day. That's quite a lot of steps on his pedometer. And he in an ideal situation, that feral horse will wear to the extent it will equal his growth,
Right.
which is the target goal that we're after. Horses are meant to carry themselves, okay? Now when we take that same horse, we take that same wild horse, and you adopted him, and we, first of all, one thing we've done is we've changed his environment. When I talk about his environment, I'm talking mostly about his footing, okay? I've restricted his amount of movement. I've restricted how far he can go, because I've put him in, whether it's a section, a half a section, quarter section, a 40-acre pasture, or a 12 by 12 stall. I've restricted the amount, his area that he can go.
Right.
And I've also decided for him what type of footing he's going to be on, okay? And then let's say I get him broke to ride, okay? Now we're going to add 15 to 30% of that horse's body weight. His wear is going to exceed his growth.
Right.
It's just the way it is. In this example with the feral horse, we have not only just changed the size of his area that he can roam, we haven't just decided what kind of footing that his feet are going to be on, whether it be pasture, shavings, sand, deep manure, mud, whatever. We've also influenced where his food and water is, because now that's our responsibility. If he's in a pen, he doesn't need to travel 50 miles a day. We've also added the human element, which is interesting. I talked to a good friend of mine, Claire Toomey, that is, she probably knows the Southern Nevada mountains better than anyone. And she's been very heavily involved in the sport of endurance for a long time. Matter of fact, she was putting rides on, I think she said, in the mid-60s. And in a conversation I had with her last week, she brought up what she called the human element, which most of us have thought about this when we're riding out in the country. And what she meant by that is the feral horse he'll pick his way. He'll decide where he goes and how he goes, okay? When we're the pilot, when we're the rider, we're going to decide where that hoof goes. This also influences the wear of that horse's foot.
Right. So over the last 15 or 20 years, there's been a movement about keeping our horse's feet barefoot and not using protection on the bottom of the horse's foot. And we're not here to be anti-barefoot, but what we're here to talk about is using protection and why we use protection on the bottom of the horse's foot. So their message is that when we nail a piece of steel on the bottom of our horse's foot, it does two things that compromise our horse's foot. The first thing it does is it gives it a little more concussion, because we use steel, which is harder than the actual foot of the horse's foot. And the other thing that it does when we nail a shoe on our horse's foot is we put 4 to 8 nail holes in the wall of our horse's foot. So what we lose by nailing a shoe on the bottom of our horse's foot is very minimal compared to what we gain. And what I mean by that is, if we do not add protection on the bottom of our horse's foot, then it can lead to several problems in the foot itself, such as bruising. The bruising can become an abscess. The abscesses can create a fever in the horse's foot, and we can have problems such as laminitis, founder, and there's so many things. And then when our horse is sore on one foot, it adds all its weight to the other 3 to carry the extra load, and then those legs start having problems in the joints and even through the foot. When we add protection, it may be damaging to the wall, very, very minor, and it may add a little more concussion, but if we do not do anything about protecting our horse's foot, then we could be out of a horse. It doesn't matter if you use shoes or some other form of protection such as boots, just use protection. Now, some of the problems that we see with our boots is that they're a little easier to lose than our shoes. You know, you don't want to be out riding and realize that you lost one of your boots 2 or 3 miles back and have to go look for it, because then you don't have any protection on that foot, and that's what it was doing. The other problem that we see with boots is it can leave sores up on the lower leg of the foot, because a lot of them will come up above the hoof wall to where they can rub on our horse's lower leg. So as you choose a boot, if you decide to use a boot, go for a boot that has a good fit for your horse's foot. If you're wondering whether you should use protection or not, we recommend that you err on the side of caution and use the protection. That way you avoid any of the potential problems that come with wearing off more of your horse's foot than your horse is growing.
The second reason we have for shoeing on horses is what we call correction. We hear the term corrective shoeing a lot, and really what that means is that's for a therapeutic or a physiological reason, and there's hundreds, if not thousands, of different things that we can apply to the bottom of the horse's foot as far as shoeing in an attempt to mostly to alleviate pain, to add support to a tendon, to a ligament, to support a joint, to better support the entire horse's body weight. Right. Period. I think the most important thing we can say on that is if you have a lameness or if you have a health issue with your horse, to work very closely with your farrier and your veterinarian.
The third reason we shoe our horse's feet is for traction. Because when we're riding our horse, we don't want our horse to slip and fall and injure themselves or us while we're riding them. A couple examples are ice, concrete, asphalt, turf. In those footings, it may be necessary to add extra traction so we avoid a potential accident.
There's a lot of different types of traction devices depending on what type of footing you're going to be riding on. This is an interesting one. This is a rubber shoe. John and I worked on Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's mounted unit when they first started for quite a number of years, and we used these shoes for the horses that would be down on the strip and on roadways, on concrete, on asphalt, and even on polished marble in some of those sidewalks in front of the casinos. And this is just almost like a tire. It's a rubber shoe with a steel insert that adds a lot of traction for slick areas.
Here again, if you think you're going to need extra traction on the horse's foot, go ahead and use it and avoid any potential accident.
The fourth reason we have for shoeing our horse's feet is competition, what we call competition, and that's kind of self-explanatory, but basically what that means is that we're going to add something to the bottom of the horse's foot in an effort to help to enhance his normal ability. One example of that is a sliding plate on reining horses. What a sliding plate is just a slightly wider, slightly longer shoe that helps the horse stay up off the ground and be able to slide those 30, 40, 50-foot slides. Other examples, there's hundreds, but other examples, this goes to traction as well as is a barrel racing horse. A barrel racing horse has to run around a barrel to be competitive in that sport at a very fast rate of speed. So he needs some serious traction getting around that barrel, which is also part of competition. Same thing with our race horses, gaited horses, and etc. It's extremely difficult to be competitive at a high level unless your horse is shod for that discipline. So those are the four reasons we shoe horses. And to sum it up, number one was protection. Okay, the point there is to not have the wear exceed the growth, so we end up with a sore-footed horse, to avoid that by protection. The second reason was correction, where we tried to alleviate pain and add support for a medical condition that your horse has or a lameness. The third reason was traction, so we don't slip and fall and hurt our horse or ourselves. And the fourth reason was competition, and we do need to be competitive today. Your horse really needs to be shod appropriately for that sport. You know, you may or may not need to shoe your horse, but what you do need to do is protect your horse from the wear exceeding the growth. Several years ago, a lot of years ago, almost probably 20 plus years ago, I was new to the horse shoeing business as a profession. And I was working for a man named Mike Dawson. I worked for him, and I was his apprentice. And he picked me up one day, and he said we had a lot of horses to shoe, and I was excited. I was ready to charge hell with the water pistol. I mean, I'm ready to go. I'm ready to learn, ready to work. We got a lot of horses to trim. So we stopped at the hardware store. We stopped at True Value, and he went in there, and he fooled around, and finally He's looking at these bow saws, you know, 2-man saws, big bow, and he settled on a bow saw about like this. Okay, so he bought the bow saw, and we got back in the truck. Now we're going to trim these horses. Said, Mike, what's with the bow saw? Why'd you buy that today? He says, trim feet. Said, right, well, I know I'm new to the business, but I've watched my dad and helped my dad since I was a little teeny kid, and I have a few, I know, been around enough to know that a bow saw, so far as I can figure out, has no place in trimming horses' feet. So I just figured, I had an hour to think about it, and I figured he just probably had a tree at home he needed to trim or something. And we showed up to the job, and it was a 20-30 acre pasture that was full of probably 10 or 15 horses. And I was pretty well shocked. Each one of those horses had a foot that it was about that long, at least, some of them longer, some of them shorter. And what he would do is, if this is a foot here, Mike would take his 4 fingers like that and take a piece of chalk and mark it here and have me cut it with the bow saw. And that was a scary deal, because when you look at that much foot and he wants you to cut back to here, I thought it'd be a bloodbath, so I was kind of cheating on the mark, leaving them a little bit longer. And he said, no, don't do that, because once we sawed that off, then we'd have to pick the foot up and use, you know, conventional nippers and, you know, finish trimming to make it back to a semblance of what looked like a horse's hoof should. And that was an extreme case of neglect.
So now we're going to cover the question that we get asked a lot, and that is, how often do we need our horse's feet taken care of? And to answer that, I'm going to use our Mustang, or our feral horse. And he's out running wild, and he's grazing and traveling to food and water, and he's wearing off the amount of foot that he's growing in the ideal situation. And we decided to domesticate this horse and bring it so we can use it to ride or to pack. And we change its environment. We put it in a pasture or a corral or a stall, and we reduce the amount of distance our horse needs to travel to wear off the foot that it's growing. So our horse is eventually going to grow more foot than it's wearing off. If we add shoes to it, we're not going to be able to wear any foot off at all, because we have a piece of steel around the bottom of it that doesn't allow it to wear off. So we have to trim our horse's feet and take off the excess amount of foot that it's growing, so we can keep our horse's foot balanced to avoid any potential lameness. You know, if our horse's feet get long, it will strain the joints and the tendons and the ligaments, and even the hoof capsule itself will start changing over time if we don't keep our horse's foot trimmed and balanced. So if we have shoes on the horse, we take the shoes off and we trim the excess foot it's growing, and we put the shoe back on. Now, if you're not going to ride your horse for a long time and you think it's going to be all right being barefoot, and you have shoes on your horse, then and you're not going to get its feet trimmed, it's always better to pull the shoes, because then at least you're given the chance for some foot to wear off for what your horse is growing.
An average horse grows about 1/4 of an inch of hoof per month. And what that means is, from the hairline to the ground surface, a horse will completely replace his hoof wall in somewhere between 9 to 12 months. Now, when the growth exceeds the wear, we need to trim that back to what we're going to call a balanced position. Okay? A balanced position, for today's example, means that that horse's foot is trimmed to where he can most effectively bear weight and travel. Okay? So beyond that, we have a little bit of what we call a safe zone. We have a little bit of growth that's acceptable, because it's not going to put your horse in jeopardy of an injury. Okay? Performance horses, they want to stay as close to this area of what we're going to call balance as possible so they can perform optimally. So that's why, for example, race horses and a lot of performances horses are done very regularly. Take the shoe off, bring it back to their area of balance, and try to stay as close to that model as possible. Beyond that, we still have an area that represents an amount of time and an amount of growth. And that is going to be a little bit different for each individual situation, depending on if your horse is shod or bare, depending on his footing, depending on his individual rate of growth. Beyond that area that we're going to call the safe zone is an area we're going to call neglect. Okay, when we get into this area, we have the potential of injury to our horse because that foot grows forward, his weight bearing changes. Like John said earlier, we can cause stress, possible injury to tendons, ligaments, muscles, joints, all throughout the entire body, just based on having feet that are too long. Okay, and then down here we have an extreme neglect, and then we have get a bow saw, and then we have your neighbors calling animal control.
Right. So to answer the question, how often do I need my horse's feet done? Most of our horses are going to fall into a 5 to 10 week schedule. Some horses will need to be done 3-4 weeks. Some horses can go 12, even longer, depending on the situation. A good farrier is going to be able to help you determine where your horse fits into that 5 to 10 weeks. And we talk more about finding a good farrier in this series on hoof care. The most important thing to remember, get your horse's feet done regularly and consistently.
And this is not regularly and consistently. As a matter of fact, John just sawed this off with a Sawzall. Said it was a lot longer than that just a couple of weeks ago, didn't you?
Yep, just a couple weeks ago.
This piece of hoof has an interesting story. This is the most extreme one that I've seen. This actual piece of hoof was sawed off in the late 80s, and so over time it shrunk up as it's dried out. This particular piece of foot had grown so far and curled up so much that it was actually growing into the horse's cannon bone. The cannon bone is the long bone below the knee and above the fetlock joint. It had actually broken the skin and was growing into the bone. That's extreme neglect. John and I have had the opportunity of attending a lot of church services in our lifetime, and when we were little, I, being the oldest out of a fairly large family, had an opportunity to observe a lot of things. And when the little babies would misbehave in church, Mom and Dad would pick them up and take them outside the chapel to try to meet their needs if they were small enough. And then we got older, the toddlers and little people that could walk, and 4 and 5 and 6 years olds. If they would misbehave, it kind of went like this. Dad would just look like this and he'd say, and if that didn't work, then he would take us outside of the chapel and give us some reasons to behave, and then would come back in. I also had the opportunity to observe another philosophy, another way of handling misbehavior, and that was on the bench across from us there was a family, and whenever these kids would misbehave, Mom would go to her purse or her diaper bag and she'd pull out a little bag of treats, maybe some sweetened breakfast cereal or some gummy bears or some M&Ms, and every time that kid would squeal and get loud, you'd feed him a treat and he'd be quiet. And while I don't claim to know little or anything about human behavior, I do know about equine behavior, and I will guarantee you that rewarding bad behavior will equal more bad behavior.
Thanks for joining us today. I'm John Jacob, and this is my brother Shane Jacob. And today in our series on hoof care, we're going to talk about a question that we get asked, and that question is, my horse won't behave for the farrier. What can I do?
Doesn't seem like that question gets asked often enough, John. People really should ask it more.
They should. This is a very important question. Our horse's feet get handled a lot of times over the course of its life. Shoeing our horse every 5 weeks, that's 10 times a year. If our horse lives to be 20 years old, that's 200 times that our farrier is going to work on our horse's feet. This needs to be a positive and safe experience for the horse, for the owner, and for the farrier. If it's not a positive experience and it's a negative experience, you're not going to get as good a job. Your shoer can't do as good a job. and it's going to be an unsafe environment for the horse, for you, and for the farrier. And it's going to cost you more money. Most horse shearers are going to charge you more money for a bad horse, and you're looking at possible sedation, which is also expensive. It doesn't have to be this way. We can make it a positive experience for the horse, the owner, and the farrier.
When we talk about behavior as it relates to hoof care, what we're asking our horse is to stand in to be able to get into a reasonable position for a reasonable length of time. And what is a reasonable length of time? A complete job should take somewhere between 20 minutes to 90 minutes. 20 minutes possibly on a trim, the horse that's good to work on, and sometimes up to 90 minutes on a horse if we're going to do some extracurricular shoeing, possibly some corrective work or something like this. We've broken the behavior down into 3 areas. Number 1 is pain, number 2 is what we call untrained, and number 3 is spoiled. Okay? Before we look at those 3 individually, what we want to look at with this horse is what is a good position to work on. And this horse we can pretty much get into an ideal position because she's so big and so flexible. So John, if you'll untie her. Ideally a horse is always held and not tied when we work on their feet. This is primarily for safety. Even a horse that's ties well and is really broke can have a bad day. And if a horse tries to get away while they're tied up, so many things can happen. They can injure their head and their neck and their back. They can injure their hocks. If what they're tied to breaks, that can bang against them and bang against you. If the rope or the halter breaks, they can fall down and skin themselves up, and it's bad news. And if they don't get away, if they tried to get away and they don't get away, if the halter and the rope and what they're tied to doesn't break, their next reaction is going to be to lunge forward, which could be on top of you. So ideally we have the horse held. So I'm just gonna touch this horse and let her know that I'm right here against her. I'll take my hand down, put a little bit of pressure on the back of her leg, and ask her to pick her foot up. We'll get into more of that when we talk about the untrained. Okay. Ask. Okay, she gives me the foot. So now I'm going to take this foot, put it here between my legs. This is pretty much an ideal position to work on a horse's foot. I'm outside from underneath her. I don't have to be completely bent over. I can work here, and it's very comfortable for me, and it's comfortable for her at this point. Okay, and same thing with the back feet. I'm going to touch her, let her know I'm here. Run my hand down her leg, ask her to pick that foot up. And I'm going to bring it back behind her into this, this is a nice comfortable position to be able to work on a horse's hind foot. The thing I wanted to stress here is where my feet are in relation to where her other hind foot is that's on the ground. I'm out behind her quite a ways. So when we look at this little guy, obviously I won't be able to get into the position I was on the big mare to be able to work on his feet. Got to be a little more creative and a little more contortive. The first aspect of behavior that we want to talk about is pain. And what we mean by pain is we have a horse that cannot physically get into a comfortable position for the farrier. And generally what we see is that's joint issues, arthritis, knees, hips, hocks, etc. are the most common. It's important to determine whether if your horse has a pain issue, because if we don't know, we can actually cause pain by trying to get that horse into a position which is going to cause bad behavior. The horse is just simply going to react to try to get away from pain. This is our example of pain today. This is a very nice old mare, and she's very much so still serviceable. A young lady owns her, and matter of fact, she rode her this afternoon. She rides her often, and she learned to ride on this horse. But this horse has some joint issues that don't allow her physically to get into a very comfortable position for the farrier. So let's just take a little bit of look of what that looks like. I'm going to ask her to pick her front foot up and to start to get into a position, and we'll just watch her expression. We'll watch her head and her ears and see how she reacts to that. Okay, so I ask her to pick her foot up. I get it to here, and if I continue, you see her lifting her shoulder? This is causing her a small amount of pain, and she can't stay in that position for very long. We try to work on this horse in a position where she doesn't have to flex that knee joint very far. She's comfortable with it down here. As the further it gets up, she feels that inner joint and it starts to hurt. She also has a little bit of issues on her hind end. I'm just going to pick up this hind foot. And one of the things that we want to look at is the relationship of my feet to her hind foot that's on the ground as compared to the first horse that we looked at, the big bay horse. I'll ask her to pick up a hind foot. Okay. This horse is not going to, she physically can't because of this joint, stretch that and be at a comfortable position. So we have to work on this horse's hind feet way up under here where she can feel comfortable. The further that I try to take it into an easier position for me, the more discomfort it causes her. One thing that we don't want to do is discipline our horse for bad behavior if we cause that bad behavior by causing that horse pain. Sometimes we actually get to a position on a serviceable horse that in order to be able to get into any position, we have to look at pain medication and possible sedation. Here's another little way sometimes that we trim hind feet. If a horse can't get to where we were earlier on this one, we actually try to trim that foot right here. There's lots of different ways. This is just an example of how we can try to accommodate a horse that, when we put into a position that is comfortable for us, causes them pain. Part 2 is untrained, and this is our example of untrained. When we talk about an untrained horse, what we're talking about, the one that just hasn't been handled, has not been trained for hoof care, and they need to be trained for hoof care. They don't come born that way, and they may be afraid. Most of the time they are, and it's regardless of the age, but training is extremely important to train your horse for hoof care. So when we think about that and start into that process, we have to understand how a horse learns and what kind of communication the horse understands. And that is a concept, one of those concepts is what we call pressure and release. Okay? And there's two types of pressure. There is physical pressure and mental pressure. Here's a classic example of physical pressure. Okay? I'm the rider of a horse and I pull back on the reins while I'm riding, and that creates some amount of pressure in my horse's mouth he can feel it in the bit. So he tries to get away from that pressure. So he moves his head, he does this. Pretty soon he starts throwing his head. He starts trying to figure out how to get away from that pressure. Eventually, I haven't released this pressure, so he throws his head back so far that he bumps me in the nose and breaks my nose, and I put my hand down and take care of my bloody nose. And I've just communicated with him that that's how you get away from pressure. So I'm starting to create a monster. The other side of that story is had I put my hand down and released the pressure when that horse was doing what I wanted him to do, he would understand that that's what I want, that's what you want me to do, and this is how to stay away from pressure, is to do what you're asking. An example of mental pressure would be, let's just say that you approached a horse in a pen or in a pasture to catch him. Okay, that's some amount of pressure. And Another example is hoof care. There is a physical element to that, but it's more of a mental pressure. When we start, so the release of pressure is going to be key here to train a horse for hoof care. So when we start that process, first of all, this filly, John and I trimmed this filly one time when she was still on her mama a few months ago, and we haven't seen her or worked on her since, and we don't know exactly where she's at in her training, so we'll see how this goes. So the first thing that we do, again, we have the horse held. We're going to let the horse know that we're here by touching her, not just going to reach down and grab her leg. We're going to go up against her, touch her, let her know that we're here. I'm going to touch her all the way down to behind her cannon bone. I'm going to add a little bit of pressure to the back of her leg, and I'm going to see if she'll pick up her foot. Once she picks her foot up, that was the desired result that I was asking for, so I'm immediately going to put that foot back down if she gives me the result I'm asking for. Okay. A little bit of pressure. She picks up her foot. That's what I asked. She's relaxed. She's not trying to get away. I release the foot. Okay. That's what you build on right there. A little bit longer, you hold it up next time. A little bit longer, you hold it up next time. 2 or 3 times a day. Eventually we get to a position. We'll see how this goes. If I can pick this foot up. See what happened right there, that's important. She tried to get away and she didn't get away. If a horse tries to get her foot away and they get away, we've communicated to them that that's the answer. So that's what they'll try to do every time. When she quit trying to get her foot away and relaxed for just a minute is when I drop the foot. Had she got her foot away when she tried to jerk it away, what I would need to do is at least 5 times pick that up and get a positive result again. Never ever leave it on a bad note. Don't put your horse up after they've tried to get away and have got their foot away. Let's try that one more time. I'm going to pick her foot up, add a little bit of pressure to the back of her foot. She lifts her foot. Eventually, we're going to get to a place where I can put it here. She's relaxed. She's not trying to get her foot away. I give her foot back. That's the concept we build on. First time is just for a second. Next time's for a second. We build on that seconds and minutes at a time to where she can put up her foot up there and stand patiently, not try to take her foot away. She's relaxed. She knows everything's going to be okay for a series of minutes, which it'll take to be able to trim her and shoe her feet. Same thing on the back foot. Let's just take a quick look, see how this goes. Again, letting her know we're here, touching up against her. I'm going to start up on her hip. I'm going to rub all the way down to the back here. I'm going to add a little bit of pressure to the back of her leg. She picks her foot up. I let her have it back. All I asked her to do right there is lift her foot off the ground. She lifted her foot off the ground. I give it back. That's the release of pressure so that she knows that's where I'm asking her to be. One more time, I'll ask her to hold it up just a little bit longer, and I'll see if we can get into a position to work on her foot. She picks her foot up, take the foot, put it here. Not going to ask her to hold it there very long. Give it back to her. Building on that, building on those time frames, not letting the horse get away, and they'll get away sometimes. Sometimes they'll get that foot away from you. The key there is not to end on that note. The key is to go back at least 5 times in that session, get a positive result so that they know that taking their foot away is not the answer. If you build on that like that over a period of time, you're on your way to having a horse that's going to be really good for hoof care. Once we have our horse where she can stand for a reasonable amount of time to have her feet trimmed, just wanted to cover 2 things that are a lot of times overlooked in training for horses for hoof care, and that is nailing and the finish stand. When we nail a shoe on, the horse feels a small amount of concussion in its foot and up its leg, and that for the first time for a lot of horses can be very scary. Most of the time in shoeing, a horse will ask a horse to put its front and hind feet both forward on a foot stand to be able to dress and finish the foot. So if we just take a quick look at how that looks, what we want to do to train that horse for nailing is we want to tap on its foot to resemble nailing. And you can use anything. I just grab this old shoe. You can use a rock, you can use a hoof pick, or you can use whatever. I doubt she's had this happen before, so we'll just see how that goes. Okay, I'm going to pick the foot up, put it into position to work on it. That's enough, okay? And that's what we want to build on right there. She reacted very nicely to that. That was quite a bit of pressure, and she did fine. Same as before, we're going to build on that with a little bit harder tapping and a little bit longer tapping. The other one is the hoof stand. How that goes is we'll take this horse's foot, we'll ask her to pick it up. She does. I'm going to bring it here to resemble a foot stand. She's okay, and it goes down. And we want to build on that. We can actually use a foot stand when we get to that point, but putting on your knee is a good place to start with that. The third element of behavior is the spoiled horse, and usually what we're talking about there is we're talking about a horse that's got away with bad behavior for a long period of time and he thinks it's okay, or he's possibly been rewarded for bad behavior, and that's where we're at. If the horse behaves that way and he needs his feet done right now, and we don't have time to train the horse, to retrain the horse, we're looking at restraint or possible sedation by a licensed veterinarian. One small thing that's aggravating for farriers is the owner that has a horse that misbehaves, and they try to pacify the horse by giving it treats all the time. He's all over the place. He's jerking his foot away from the farrier. He might be striking, he might be biting, he might be trying to kick you. And the owner, I get it, they're trying to pacify the horse to coax him into behaving by giving him a treat. But the horse doesn't understand. That's not the way they learn. Well, they do learn. They learn that if I misbehave, I get a reward, which perpetuates the problem.
You know, we can fix two of these problems with our horses. The horse that's spoiled and the horse that's untrained that doesn't know any better. And it's our responsibility as horse owners to fix these problems. You know, you're going to get a better job, you're going to have a better relationship with your horse and with your farrier, and it's going to cost you less money in the long run. You know, if you feel unsafe training your young horse or working on a spoiled horse, which can be very unsafe, get professional help. Hire a trainer to help you go through this, because even the money you're spending on your trainer is going to be able to save you money years down the road. Like I said earlier, 200 times on a 20-year-old horse, that's a lot of times, you know, and you're going to be able to keep that good shoer, and he's going to come back. So get your horse trained. If you can't, hire somebody to help walk you through it.
I was out a while back looking for one thing and another, and I stopped at a local feed store. It's probably the biggest feed store in our area. Matter of fact, it's the super Walmart of feed stores, you know. And I asked somebody where to find what I was looking for, and he said to go to the end of aisle 84, and it's beyond that. So I find aisle 84, and hanging in the middle of the ceiling of aisle 84, it says Hoof Health, Hoof Care, both sides, and it's a long aisle. So I stopped and I looked at a few things as I went down there. Stronger, longer, better. Nice. A must-have if you're a competitor. Okay. A must-have if you're not a competitor. You know, I got to the end of the aisle and I concluded that according to the labels on everything that I picked up, that I pretty much needed everything in the aisle if I was going to have good horse hoof health. And as I was standing there trying to figure out how I was going to add on to my tack room, you know, it can just be kind of confusing. You wonder what do you need? It's marketed to us so strong we don't know what we need if we need anything.
Thanks for joining us today on our series on hoof care. I'm John Jacob, and this is my brother Shane Jacob. And today we're going to talk about a question that we get asked a lot, and that is, what can I do? What can I do between farrier visits? What can I do to prevent a lameness? And what can I do to make my horse have healthier feet? You know, we hear this question a lot after there's already a lameness problem. And at that point, there is a lot of times something that you can do, or there may be something that you can do could have done to prevent this lameness. But that's not always the case. Sometimes we just want to know if there's something that we can do to make our horse have better feet, because their feet are so important.
You know, one of the most important things we can do is simply just not neglect our horse's feet. Long feet, most of the time, build up dead sole, and this dead sole is a low oxygen environment, which equals a perfect breeding ground for bacteria and fungus. One of the most common things that we see is thrush, and thrush can either be a fungus or a bacteria. You can recognize it because it's really dark brown or black, oozy, foul smelling, and it's an infection that can actually eat up the bottom of the sole of the foot and into the frog. Thrush can develop into an abscess that can go throughout the entire hoof capsule, sometimes getting so deep that it goes up and breaks out the hairline, and abscesses can turn into, you know, they can take a long time to heal, sometimes up to a year, sometimes more. And simply not neglecting our horse's feet is one of the most important things we can do.
You know, a lot of times we're asked, what product does my horses need? Does my horse need a product, and which one should I use? You know, to answer that, we're going to have to ask ourselves what we're trying to accomplish. And you know, with these products, there's several ideas that they're trying to accomplish, and that is, do I need to make my horse's feet softer? Do I need to make my horse's feet harder? Is there a medicated topical that I can put on my horse's feet to prevent an infection? Or do I need to give my horse something orally to help with the health of its foot? You know, so when we talk about our harder and our softer feet, we've got to think about what makes our horse's feet hard, what makes our horse's feet soft, what determines that? And the answer is the amount of moisture that's in the horse's feet. So what determines how much moisture? And the answer to that is blood flow and circulation inside the hoof capsule, and moisture that's absorbed through the bottom of the foot from the outside, from water or standing in their urine, how much gets absorbed from there. And that's going to determine what, the amount that they get determines how hard or soft our horses' feet are. If we want our horses' feet softer, we've got to think why we want our horses' feet softer. If we neglect our horses' feet a little bit and they get a little long, and they'll get brittle and break up, and they can actually break up too high into the live tissue and create a really painful, it's very painful for the horse. It's kind of like a hangnail on us, and they can bleed from it and stuff. But it's more important to keep them trimmed to get rid of that excess dead hoof, instead of trying to get our horses' feet softer. If we have them trimmed regularly, they're not going to get that long. In ideal circumstances, our horses are meant to retain the correct amount of moisture that's absorbed into their foot. The very outer layer of the wall is called periopal, and it acts as a barrier to keep moisture inside the foot and keep too much from the outside, and that's what protects the wall. Most of the moisture that we get from outside of our blood flow is going to be moisture that comes up through the bottom of the horse's foot. But if we take our horse's foot, and say we're going to a horse show and we want our horse's feet really pretty, because when we go showing this classes, the judge looks at the horse's feet and they look, and and so we clean them up and dress off all the little rough edges, and we sand it down, and then we put a paint over it to make them shiny for the judge. But when we go home, now we've taken that periopal off our horse's feet. So, to replace it, we can use an oil-based product that will create kind of a barrier and act the same way that the periopal does, and create a barrier to retain the moisture from inside and outside the foot. And most of the time, we're not trying to get a softer foot, we're actually trying to get a harder foot. A harder foot is more resilient to more terrain. You know, a hard foot doesn't feel the rocks that the horse steps on. We want it usually a harder, tougher foot so we can go more places and not have to worry about it. So to get a harder foot, there's some products out there such as turpentine, formalin, formaldehyde. The products that have these things in them are what you do when you put them on the bottom of the horse's foot, it dries the horse's foot out, which makes it takes our moisture out, which makes our horse's feet harder, which makes them more resilient to the terrain that our horses are walking on and that we ride them on. Now we're going to talk about oral supplements. You know, there's thousands of products that claim they're going to give our horse a healthier, stronger foot. But a horse that's on a good quality diet that consists of a good forage and clean water, most of those horses aren't going to need an additional supplement just for its feet. If you're concerned with your horse's nutrition, you can always talk to your veterinarian to help guide you through that. One of the most common ingredients in oral supplements for hoof care is biotin. And biotin is a proven ingredient that makes our horse's feet grow faster. So why would we want our horse's feet to grow faster? Most of the time it's because we have a damaged foot, an injured foot, and a good example of that is a quarter crack. And what a quarter crack is it's a crack around the hairline of the foot that's caused by imbalance, and it creates quite a bit of pain for most horses. So we have a crack at the top of the foot, and we can give our horse biotin to help make that foot grow faster, to help grow that crack down and replace it with good healthy foot. There's also thousands of medicated topical treatments that they make to put on the bottom of our horse's feet to prevent or treat an infection. A common ingredient that we see in these is copper sulfate. Copper sulfate is an antifungal that is very effective in treating infections such as thrush. Thrush is a very common minor infection in the bottom of the horse's foot that can become a very serious problem if not treated. If you're worried about having a bacteria infection or a fungus infection on the bottom of your horse's feet, it's good to use these products because there's no adverse side effects to using them. Remember when you're using any of these topical products that they're going to be most effective after the horse has been recently trimmed. That way you're not treating any dead hoof and wasting your product.
You know, to try to sum up the question of what can I do in between visits, what can I do for better hoof health, what can I do to prevent a lameness, chances are under most situations you won't need an additional product or supplement just specifically for your horse's hooves. Like John said, if your horse is on a reasonable diet, and if you're concerned about your diet, check with your veterinarian that diet is going to provide him a quality foot. The most important thing though that we can do is, like we've talked about before, is to manage the growth versus the wear. And manage the growth. Have your horse's feet trimmed on a regular basis. That excess dead material is a perfect breeding ground for problems of all types of lamenesses and everything. Clear up affect the entire horse's body. Sanitary is huge. And what we mean by sanitary is keeping your horse's footing dry and clean as possible. Whether it's sand, shavings, whatever it is. You know, we don't want our horses in deep mud. We don't want them in deep urine hole. We don't want them in wet manure up to their knees. All these things cause problems, and that's what we can do that makes a huge difference. The other thing is to clean our horse's feet. You know, pick your horse's feet when you get him out to work him or ride him or whatever. And let's just take a look at how that works. So let's talk about cleaning our horse's feet out. Something as simple as that. Actually, there's several things that go into it. We're not just making an attempt at sanitary, and we are cleaning the horse's foot, but we're also looking for a potential problem inside the foot. A problem could be you have a rock wedged inside the shoe. A problem could be that you've found an abscess or some nasty smelling thrush, or you're picking your horse's foot with a hoof pick and blood starts coming out. Then you've identified a problem and should get a hold of your farrier right away. A lot of times we can think that the hoof pick could be causing the horse pain, And so let's just think about that for a minute. This little horse we have right here, he's probably every bit of 850 pounds. And at a trot through the rocks with a saddle and a rider, you can imagine how much PSI pressure comes down on each foot at one time, thousands of pounds of pressure per square inch on each area of that sole is what he is built to withstand. So the point is if he can feel, as hard as you may press, if he can feel pain with that hoof pick, you've identified a problem. So don't be necessarily hesitant about getting down alongside that frog and cleaning that foot out. So let's take a look at exactly how that works. We've just pulled this horse out of his pen and his feet are dirty. So let's pick a foot up and look at that. So we'll start by touching our horse, let him know that we're here. Touch him all the way down, add a little bit of pressure to the back of his leg till he picks his foot up. We'll take it by the toe. I'm left-handed. Take the tip of the pick, insert it at the frog, move it forward on either side of the frog a couple of times. Down in there. Got a nice dirty foot to work on. Something like that. This one has a cute little brush on it even. There, works like that. But anyway, the point here is take the tip of the pick, insert it on at the heel alongside the frog, go forward, other side, go forward. We can scratch around a little bit, see that we're not causing any pain. Looks like a pretty good foot. During the course of this series, we've talked a lot about relying on a good farrier. And a frequently asked question is, where do you find that farrier? Where do you find that guy? And the relationship between the owner and the farrier is a very personal relationship. We may have a lot of money invested in our horse. We love our horse, and we need to find somebody that we really trust to take care of him. So what do we look for when we're looking for a good farrier? First of all, we want to have somebody that's competent. We want to have somebody that has a basic idea of how to balance a horse's foot. We want to make sure that we have somebody that's not going to make our horse sore-footed, competent, okay? We want to find somebody that's going to get along with our horse. What I mean by that is just be fair with your horse. You want to find somebody that you're not going to feel is too rough with your horse and is patient with your horse. And just generally somebody that runs a good business, somebody that'll answer the phone, show up when he's supposed to, etc. So where do you find those guys? You know, is it the guy on the first page of the Google search? I advertise with zeal on our website for my farrier service. I don't know if that's necessarily the best place to find a good farrier. Or is it the guy with the the coolest looking card at the board at the feed store? Where is it, John?
The guy with the nicest truck.
Okay.
No, there's the AFA, the American Farriers Association, is the largest association of farriers in the United States. And they have a certification, a certified journeyman farrier that you pass tests and you have a certain standard of basic knowledge as far as hoof care on your horse's feet, so that's a place. Another place is schools. As this horseshoer gone to and completed and graduated from a horseshoeing school, or has he served an apprenticeship with another farrier? Another thing to consider when we're looking for a farrier is experience. Somebody that's been in the trade and has a lot of experience, worked on a lot of horses, been able to see a lot of things, a lot of problems, and been able to work with a lot of horses. There's nothing against the new guy, because every one of us was at one time just starting out. If you hire somebody new, it's a good idea to make sure that they have another farrier, an experienced farrier, that can, when they come up with a problem they've never seen before, they can give a phone call and get advice, and even maybe have them come check it out and give them a hand with any problems that they hadn't seen just because they haven't been in the business that long.
All these things are good things to consider in our search for a good farrier.
Probably the best way to find a farrier is through a referral. And from a referral, what we're looking for is somebody that has kept someone else's horses sound for a long period of time. And that's usually the best place. We might get, if we're new to town, we might get a referral from a veterinarian. A veterinarian, chances are, has been out in the field and he's seen different people's work. He's in a position to probably get a better referral than if you're new to town. He can probably give you a good referral. Or from a friend, or for somebody that has just been there for a long time. And then you see if that matches up. You see if that matches up for you and your horse. And if it doesn't, try another referral.
When you do find a good farrier, take good care of them. Give them a good, safe working environment and things that we've talked about.
Sure. Another question that we get asked a lot is hot shoeing and cold shoeing. Do I need to have my... it's almost standard advertising. You can look on most business cards of farriers. It'll say hot, cold, and corrective. Does my horse need to be hot shod, hot shoed, or cold? And what's the difference? So we have to look at what is hot shoeing, okay? What even is hot shoeing? And, 100 years ago, blacksmith had to steal a piece of bar stock and make a shoe and punch holes in it. And that's pretty hard to do without that steel being hot. And the other reason is modifying keg shoes. And keg shoes are factory ready-made shoes that come in all different shapes and sizes and weights and tractions and etc. But sometimes we need to modify those, and it's easier just to shape a shoe if it's hot because the steel it bends easier. Do you need to do that? No, you don't have to get your steel hot to do it. We can shape shoes cold and we can nail them on cold. My personal opinion is, my personal belief though, is a farrier should have the skill to build a shoe out of a piece of bar shock, and should know how to do several different types of modifications on keg shoes, because there's so many different applications where we need to change a factory ready-made shoe. The question though really is hot fit. Okay, so we're just talking about hot shoeing. The correct term is hot fit. And what hot fit means is we're going to actually take a shoe. We're going to take a shoe that is hot, not a red hot, but a black heat, still very hot, and we're going to sear that onto the bottom of the horse's foot. Okay, we're going to burn it on. We're going to show you what that looks like here in just a second. And why would you do that? Why would you do that? You can make the case that would seal up that area around the hoof wall from being able to absorb moisture, but most of the area is in the hoof wall where the shoe goes, which doesn't absorb that much moisture anyway. The main reason that we do that is to create two surfaces that meet exactly together. In other words, we can take and trim a horse's foot and we can look at it and it looks exactly level to our eye. We can take a shoe, we can take it to the anvil, we can get it flat to what looks exactly flat to our eye. Regardless how good we are getting the shoe flat and the hoof flat, when we put those two together, somewhere down there's going to be even the smallest amount of an airspace if we don't hot fit the shoe. What that little airspace can do is it can cause that shoe to move with the horse's foot, which will eventually loosen up the nail, which basically it's easier to lose a shoe if it's cold fit. Do you need to hot fit every shoe? No. 90% of the horses I do get fit cold and the shoes stay on until the nails wear off. Hot fitting a shoe is a good practice, but is it necessary? No, it is not necessary. In most cases, if you're concerned if your horse is constantly losing shoes, that may help. So that may be a place to where you would ask for your horse to be hot fit. Sometimes people charge more just to hot fit because they have to take the time to get their forge out, get the shoe hot. That's something to consider. So it is a good practice, but not a necessary practice. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So the first thing we do is get the shoe to a black heat. If it gets to a red heat, it's too hot and it can damage too much material. If we get the shoe to an orange or red heat, then we just let it cool for a minute before we actually take it to the horse and fit the horse. So the first little sear, and this does not hurt the horse. A lot of times they'll, if they haven't been hot fit before, they may be afraid of the smell of the smoke, but it shouldn't go in. We shouldn't allow it to go in far enough to hurt the horse at all. So then we burn it on again a little bit more. And now you can see, when you look at this, you can see throughout the entire perimeter of the foot that the shoe is fitting the foot. So now we have a complete fit to where every part of that shoe is completely touching every part of that horse's foot.
Another question we hear quite a bit is, does that hurt? And mostly we hear that from people that are watching a horse being shod for the first time, or having the shoe burned onto the bottom of the horse's foot. And the answer to that is no, it doesn't hurt. If your farrier's trimmed the foot properly and he's driving the nails in the correct place and there's not an injury on the horse's foot, it doesn't hurt. The only thing your horse should feel is small concussion while we're driving nails throughout the joints and the leg in the horse, but that's very minor and it does not create any pain.
Another frequently asked question is do I need to wait to ride my horse after it's been shod? And the answer is no. If the foot's been properly trimmed, if we have a shoe on there for protection and the shoe's been applied properly, you should be able just to go on without waiting any length of time. As soon as that last foot's finished, horse should be good to ride.
Another question that we get asked a lot is, what is a reset, and is it okay to have my horse's shoes reset? What a reset is okay, let's take an example. We trim a horse's foot and we apply a new shoe, whether it's a handmade or a keg shoe, and we talk about handmade and keg shoes later on in the series. So we apply a new shoe. 6 to 8 weeks, we come back for the next cycle, we remove the shoe, we trim the foot, and the shoe still has adequate steel material to last another cycle. So we clean the shoe, we reapply the same shoe to the horse's foot. That's what a reset is. And is it okay? Yes, it's definitely okay, because if we're shoeing our horse solely for protection, that amount of material equals the protection. So whether it's new or a few weeks old, it makes no difference whatsoever.
What did we just say? Call. What? Whoop.
One of the most frequently asked questions is
Today, Junior.
doing that
Frequently.
frequently.
And crap.
There's only 4
Okay,
reasons.
I got it. All right.
Whenever you're ready.
We appreciate you joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you when do we look forward to seeing you? What did I miss? I just ran out of words.
Questions.
I didn't wind it up right. We hope you. No, I don't know. I'm done. That didn't work. Did it?